Welcome to the Compounders Podcast, where we explore the anatomy of public company wealth creation stories. On this show, we invite you to be a fly on the wall for the actual conversations professional investors have with public company CEOs. I'm your host, Ben Claremont, a partner and portfolio manager at Cove Street Capital. In these conversations, I interview senior executives by posing the exact questions I ask as part of Cove Street's diligence process. Whether you are a professional investor, founder, or someone who is simply interested in business, we think this podcast has something for you. This season of Compounders, the Anatomy of a Multibagger, is sponsored by Tegas. Tegas is an innovative and disruptive company that is changing the way professional investors work. For more information, please visit their site at tegas.co.
All opinions expressed by your hosts and the podcast guests are solely their own opinion and do not reflect the opinion of Cove Street Capital or any affiliates. This podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not investment advice and should not be relied upon for any investment decisions. We are not recommending the purchase or sale of any securities. The hosts and guests may be beneficial owners of the securities discussed. You should not assume that the securities discussed are or will be profitable.
Our guests on the show today are Scott King and Jeff Gorman, the CEO and executive chairman of the Gorman-Rupp Company, a $700 million market cap company that designs, manufactures, and sells pumps and pump systems to customers all over the world. 2022 has been quite an eventful year for the company. Earlier in the year, Jeff Gorman stepped back to chairman, allowing Scott to become the CEO despite not having the Gorman last name. The company also completed a very large acquisition of a company called Fill-Rite. Given those events and all of the other challenges in the world today, I was excited to speak with Scott and Jeff about the timing of the management transition and the expectation that Scott continue the company's long history of dividend increases, the rationale for the Fill-Rite deal and why now was the right time to take a big swing with some leverage, the importance of culture and the family-like values that have persisted over the last 90 years, where the company is investing in technology and innovation, and how the company approaches tough economic times given all of the different crises the company has weathered during its long history. For full disclosure, Cove Street is not a Gorman-Rupp shareholder. And without any further ado, here's my conversation with Scott King and Jeff Gorman of Gorman-Rupp. As always, we will start this podcast off at a pivotal moment in the company's history. Between the management transition and the company's largest acquisition in recent memory, the current moment seems quite pivotal. So I will start off with Jeff and ask about why this was the right time to transition from CEO to executive chairman.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today, everyone. Well, the decision to move Scott into the president CEO position has been in the works for several years. We do not have a mandatory retirement age. I had pretty much decided a few years ago that I should probably have my replacement in my chair by the time I was 70. And that gives me about 45 years. I think I've earned a step aside a little bit. I'm not leaving, I'm just moving over, not out. So I was 70 in March, and so Scott moved to CEO. It has been in motion for quite a while. So it's been a very easy transition. I think it's been easy, gone very smoothly. The Fill-Rite actually did not have a thing to do with it because it came after the first of the year. So Scott has pretty much handled that entirely, Robert.
And one thing as investors that we always think about is the decision between an internal candidate and, whatever, leveraging all of that information and knowledge that someone has gained over years versus, a fresh perspective from someone outside the company who may bring experiences that, the company hasn't really experienced. So maybe talk a little bit about how you decided to go with Scott as an internal candidate versus, searching the universe for the next CEO.
Well, I guess you always take a look at that in your mind, but a lot of companies like to compare outside candidates for top positions with who they have in the shop or in the office right now. And I think this would be very true if we didn't have a lot of turnover or had a lot of turnover, which we don't. So we're a long-term company, especially on the management side. We simply don't have a lot of turnover in top management. So we get to know our people real well, and they get to know us. So even if we make an acquisition, the management of those companies that we purchase tends to stay with us for a long, long time. For example, we just had two retired that Scott, what, 45 plus years of both of them?
Yep.
I mean, that's pretty unusual. So we have a pretty good idea of what that person that we're putting into the top role, whether they're going to be able to handle it or not. And that was the case with Scott. There was never any real question. Sure, the board does its due diligence to a certain extent and says around, but every time it came back to Scott's the guy, and we're going to stay inside.
And we're going to talk about culture later as well, but you just brought up something that sparked an interest in me. I mean, having people be there for 45 years plus is pretty impressive. What do you think about the culture of the business? What do you think has allowed people to stay there that long and thrive for so long?
Well, I don't know if there's any magic to it. We run our business like a family company, even though we're public. It's still a very family-oriented culture here, and I think most people are very comfortable. It's a Midwestern environment. It's not New York. It's not Chicago. Not LA. People, when employees, when they start with us, they tend to stay with us for forever. A very little turnover. Now I know that's not the trend today, with a lot of folks work a lot of different places, but we, especially in top management, they tend to stick it out with us, and we stick it out with them. So it's just a culture that has worked very well for many, many years.
And Scott, one thing we often worry about in a situation where the CEO steps back to executive chairman and the incoming CEO is that the incoming CEO feels like he or she is being second guessed or feels like he or she doesn't have true autonomy. How did you and Jeff work to mitigate that in terms of your relationship so that you don't feel like you're always being, someone looking over your shoulder?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Ben. First, Jeff and I worked together for 18 years now. So I've had a great opportunity to be very well trained in the principles Gorman-Rupp was founded on and has operated on for now almost 90 years. Taking care of customers first, building quality product, back it with reliable service, and treat your employees like you would want to be treated. That works. It's worked for 90 years. It'll work for the next 90. I have every confidence of it. So in that regard, I feel like I'm pretty well trained. Jeff, of course, has a wealth of knowledge from decades of experience with our products and customers. And that's important, the knowledge we don't want to lose. And having said that, we have a very solid strategic planning process in place. We share it with our full board, and I know I have the board and Jeff's full support, encouragement to take the company forward with what our total plans are for growth. And it's not just my plan; it's everybody's plan. I'm just the one who's supposed to shepherd the organization through it today.
And so let's move on to Fill-Rite, as we talked about a little bit. So the company just acquired Fill-Rite. I think either one of you can take this, but maybe talk a little bit about what attracted you to Fill-Rite and how you feel like it fits strategically and operationally with the legacy Gorman-Rupp business.
Sure.
Yeah. Go ahead, Scott. That's been your baby.
So, Ben, it fits all of our acquisition criteria, and we have criteria that we've laid out, covered with the board, and that we share with the investment community. I'll talk a little bit about it. First, Fill-Rite has product that Gorman-Rupp does not have. They manufacture a line that we don't manufacture today or didn't before the acquisition. They sell product into markets we know, primarily the agriculture and construction markets, and Gorman-Rupp really cut its teeth in the construction market, and so we know the markets. Fill-Rite's product is extremely high quality. It's an excellent brand name, number one share in the market that they're in, and that matches pretty well with a lot of Gorman-Rupp's existing products. Fill-Rite has a great management team. They're staying with the business. We're very excited about that group. They have big plans, and we're certainly going to support them in those plans. We've also talked about expanding some of those plans. So that's great. They have nice facilities. They have a well-trained workforce. And Fill-Rite's been growing. They have additional prospects for growth. And again, we can help supplement it. So it really fit every one of our acquisition criteria when it came up. Nice to see.
And as I was looking through your historical financials, it stood out to me that this company has not been very acquisitive at all, especially in the last 5 years, but really over as far as I could go back. So, this was a pretty big swing. So what about Fill-Rite? I mean, you described the structure of it, but what about Fill-Rite was so differentiated that it would justify, a pretty large swing on the M&A side?
Yeah, Ben, I would say first we were a little frustrated that we hadn't been able to make a great acquisition in recent time. It's always been part of our growth philosophy. We've made many acquisitions over our history, and we'll continue to do so if when the right one becomes available at a price that's reasonable. So we've been patient as we've been evaluating candidates. Always had a number of conversations in place. And then just thankfully, we found the right fit. Fill-Rite's relatively large, for an acquisition for Gorman-Rupp. And as we evaluated it, it just felt like it was landing at the home it was supposed to be.
And the other thing that is a little bit different about this acquisition is that it's adding a little bit of leverage to the balance sheet and to the business model. I'm interested, given that this company hasn't really had much net debt on its balance sheet, how did you get comfortable with adding that leverage?
Well, you're right. Historically, we've not had much debt. The nature of the quality of Fill-Rite as a company and the combined cash flows of Gorman-Rupp and Fill-Rite, meaning we're going to delever pretty quickly. We publicly stated to less than 3.5 times EBITDA, and that's true even if interest rates go up, even if there's a recession. We've modeled all that out, and so while it maybe is atypical for us in our history to have that kind of debt. For the right acquisition, it was the right thing to do, and we're certainly comfortable having made the choice.
And just looking at the kind of the financials you have presented for Fill-Rite, looks like a pretty impressive business. And really, what stood out to me was the big difference in gross margins between legacy Gorman-Rupp and Fill-Rite. So maybe talk a little bit about the products or industry structure. You said they're number one in their market, so that probably helps. But what allows Fill-Rite to be able to generate 40% gross margins and close to 25% EBITDA margins?
Yeah. First, it's a very, very well-respected brand. When a farmer or contractor needs a pump, they go look for the red Fill-Rite pump. It's very sought after. Next, it's a high-quality product. When farmers and contractors use that, they need it. They need it to work right the first time it does. And if there are challenges with it, Fill-Rite's very good about supporting those customers in repairing the product. It's a well-run company. They have very good marketing and product management skills within the organization. And they're also pretty effective at driving cost out of the product without reducing the performance of the product or the quality that the customers experience. So it's a very well-run company in a well-respected place in a market that, they can command some price for the product.
And as you think about combining these two companies and how it changes both the organic growth profile of the business and also maybe capital intensity, which we haven't talked about, talk about that a little bit. Does capital intensity change as you add Fill-Rite into the equation versus kind of the legacy operations? And then what have you told people and in meetings about, what does the organic growth profile of the combined company look like?
So first, in order to grow, we got to maintain the customer base and success we have. And that means Fill-Rite or legacy Gorman-Rupp companies, very high quality products and great people backing them up with service. We won't break that model. That's part of the competitive mode around the business. So additionally, in organic growth, new product development certainly allows us to sell more to our existing customers. Both legacy Gorman-Rupp and Fill-Rite have new product development plans. We think at this point we're adding to Fill-Rite's new product development plans as we work jointly on their next version of their strategic plan. Both organizations are pretty good about going out and acquiring new customers, solving problems for folks that in the field when they have challenges. We have our sights on additional international growth. In 2021, a third of Gorman-Rupp sales were outside of the United States, and about 95% of Fill-Rite sales were into North America. So not only will legacy Gorman-Rupp, grow further internationally as we go, we've got a good opportunity with Fill-Rite to do so as well. So from an organic growth profile, we often get the question: Is this a GDP business? Right? No, we certainly have opportunities beyond GDP, and if I take regular organic growth, international organic growth, and then add acquisitions to that, we think the future is pretty bright for us from a growth standpoint. Capital allocation, I guess you asked about, I didn't cover. We really haven't changed our priorities in that regard. We have a regular and consistent method of investing in the business. That's our first priority. And, from a maintenance capital standpoint, we'll add Fill-Rite right into the mix and continue on in that regard. We have a pretty good policy on our dividend. You may have noted 49 years of increasing dividends, and current management doesn't plan to break that streak. The prior management did a pretty good job of it, and we'll continue on that path if at all possible, which we think certainly is. Next, we would have been focused on traditionally on acquisitions. Before that, we'll pay down some of the debt related to Fill-Rite. And so really our capital allocation strategy hasn't changed as a result of the acquisition. We've just added Fill-Rite to it, which is pretty well invested in already, and we'll continue to maintain good facilities, good processes, invest in the people, invest in new product development. So.
And I'm sure you don't want to be that guy who comes in the first 18 months has to break that dividend string. So
that won't happen.
but again, we don't focus a whole lot on short-term stuff on this podcast. This is more focused on long-term. But the fact is, since we had a last season of this podcast, the R word recession is now on the tips of everyone's tongue. I think everyone listening would be interested to understand this company's been around for a really long time. How this company's performed during previous economic downturns, and how would you expect to perform, in a tough environment going forward?
I'll take that one, Scott, and Ben, if it's all right. Well, to say we're recession-proof is a stretch. We're not recession-proof. I think everybody gets affected, but we probably and do function. We're fortunate that when a recession does hit, many of our markets are really necessities of life. People are still going to need water to drink. They're still going to go to the restroom. They're still going to have wastewater to contend with. I don't think petroleum is going to go away like some think in the next couple of years. So chemicals are still going to be there. There's a lot of things that are still going to need pumps. And it's you use a lot of pumps whether you know it or not. Probably the orange juice you had this morning touched the Gorman-Rupp pump, or the last airplane that you got on went through a Gorman-Rupp pump. You didn't know about that, but we're behind the scenes. And those are just not going to go away. So our business may reduce some because of the environment or because of the recession, but we're very fortunate that it's still a very mature market, but a very necessary market for everyone to have. So that's by design. We want to be there. And that's another reason we're so broad with the amount of different products that we hold in the different markets that we're in. Because usually if something's up, something's down. But in a recession, when most things are down, that's some of our key markets that are going to be there for everyone.
Compounders is brought to you in partnership with Tegas. We created Compounders to uncover the lessons and frameworks of the best capital compounders in the world. And if you are a professional investor, VC, or operator, and you appreciate the deep research into the businesses explored on this podcast, check out tegas.co/compounders. With Tegas, you can learn about any company directly from former execs, current customers, and industry experts, all of which are in position to offer unique insights into a company's growth, its customer value, and its competition. What makes Tegas different is that you don't have to lead your own expert calls. The platform offers instant access to the world's largest collection of investor-led call transcripts on companies such as Compounders guests, Viasat, Element Solutions, and Avid Technology. All you have to do is log in and you'll get instant access to nearly 25,000 expert call transcripts. And the best part, the Tegas collection grows larger with each investor and company that joins. Still want to do your own expert calls? Tegas is the right solution. Experts that are just as good or better than what you'd find on other networks, but starting at just $300 per call, not the $1,000 or more others charge. If you're ready to go deeper on the next compounding business, head to tegas.co/compounders for a free trial. I can personally say that having access to the Tegas platform and Rolodex of experts has fundamentally changed the quality of due diligence Cove Street does on both new and existing ideas. And Jeff, this company has almost a 90-year history. I mean, just by my count, it's weathered a depression, 2 world wars, multiple financial crises, and now, of course, the COVID period. So how do you think all of that, and how a company that survived all of that and thrived through all of that, how do you think that influences how you approach a new challenging period relative to maybe a company that's been, started in 2012?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, as everybody's talking, what is a recession? That's going back and forth right now. But Ben, I would say that we try to remain, and we do remain, very flexible. We're not structured because we're not owned by anybody. We can make decisions immediately if we have to. That's very good. And you don't know what a recession or a depression, a war or anything like that, or even COVID is going to throw at us. So you've got to stay flexible no matter what you do so that you can adjust to the times. You take World War II, for example. Ford was making airplanes. They made B-24s instead of cars. Chrysler made tanks in Detroit. I mean, you got to remain flexible because you can't really predict what's going to happen tomorrow, especially in today's world where things happen instantaneously. So I would say flexibility is the real key. The other thing that we do, we're probably different in, is that when a recession hits or a downturn, we increase our inventory. The pump business is an emergency business. If you don't have the pumps for your customers, like of all the shortages that are going on now, we look at it as a way to increase market share. Because if you get a customer out of trouble, he remembers that the next time. And he'll remember the company that didn't get him the truck or get him the pump, and the company that did. And we want to be the company that did get it for him, so he can be a customer of ours forever.
And you mentioned being flexible. Another thing that's being thrown at companies right now is significant input cost inflation, wage inflation. There's just a lot of cost pressures these days that we haven't seen in a long time. This company survived through the 70s, so obviously you have some experience in that. But maybe talk a little bit about that general environment. So where are you seeing the most inflationary pressures? And then, obviously everyone thinks they have pricing power and then they have to go get it. So, I mean, I'm interested, either Scott or Jeff, how you feel like that, your sense of your pricing power has actually played out in the market.
Go ahead, Scott.
Thanks, Jeff. So, Ben, it's really everywhere. Raw materials, energy, freight, labor. There just about isn't anything that gone up as far as input costs go. Some of the most substantial are, going to be in things like, electric motors and that kind of thing. Gorman-Rupp has always taken the approach into the market that, we're not the least expensive pump in the market. We think we're the best pump, and we think we have the best service. But in order to do that, we've got to be reasonable about pricing, but we also have to protect the store, if you will. The company needs to be around in order to support customers with repair parts in the future. And so we have taken pricing action into the market to maintain margins, but we're also not taking advantage of the situation. We know some of our competitors are raising prices with very little notice and are doing so in ways that we know have to be, outpacing their cost structure. We're trying to be reasonable about it because, we want to make sure that we take care of the customers who come to rely on us over the years as well as we can. And also, still protect the business, moving forward. So we've had good success in pricing so far.
And I want to jump to the international side because that was an interesting, as you talk about Fill-Rite and the opportunity there. Fill-Rite's very, very domestic focused. You guys have a fair amount of international exposure already. In fact, you're selling. I think your website says you sell in 135 countries. So maybe let's talk about the strategy, of growing outside the U.S. And then, how do you think about taking the Fill-Rite products into the countries that you're already in outside the U.S.?
So, as you may know, the majority of our sales are through distribution. And I would say it's important to be able to support that distribution, whether we're doing it from our, the home office in the U.S. That works fine in a lot of situations, but in many cases, it works better to support them from one of our own operations around the world. And so, our scale in a region, whether that's in the Americas or Africa or Europe or the Middle East, is really there to support the growth of distributors in their home country. We bring distributors to our facilities for training. They bring their customers to our facilities for training. Our regional folks are in customers' applications, reviewing, pump applications, reviewing challenges if there maybe was a misapplied pump or a problem in the field. And so that international footprint, as we continue to grow it, is really there to make sure our distribution is the best distribution and the most trained and the best able to support their own customers. And that's working pretty well. And I would see Fill-Rite being able to leverage the same footprints that we've established for GR over time.
And one thing I often look at as an investor is like, okay, so this company is in X number of countries and sales are, X 100 million. Like, what does sales per country look like? Because that gives you a sense of local scale. And so when I look at that, I mean, it looks like you're doing on average like less than $1 million per country. How should someone look at that in terms of like assessing whether you have appropriate scale and whatever costs to distribute through the distribution or to supply the distribution into those countries makes sense from a, whatever corporate margin perspective?
Sure. So, it's a balancing act of what infrastructure do we put in place around the world. And then, you've got to make sure that the distributor in that location, what we've noted over a period of time is there's really 5 things that make a distributor successful, in an international market. The first is that they're capitalized enough to do business. The second is they stock inventory in their home location. The third is that they've got bricks and mortar to be able to work out of and store that inventory in. The fourth is they've got very trained salespeople. We play a pretty key role in that. We also play a pretty key role in supplementing that inventory. If they sell out of their own, we store it locally instead of them having to come maybe all the way back to the United States for lead time. And then the fifth thing is they've got to be able to service the product. And if someone's having a challenge and needs help in the field, the best thing that sells the next new pump is a pump that worked well, in the field. And when it doesn't work well for whatever reason, being out and being able to service it or offer a replacement is pretty important. Relative to less than $1 million, per country. Obviously, there are some where we're stronger than others, and for those where we're not as strong, that's a double-edged sword. There's a lot of opportunity to continue to grow internationally, and it's one of the reasons it's part of our focus. We have lots of opportunity to go past that level. So pretty exciting for us, looking forward in that regard.
And you mentioned your desire to invest in the, both your own product roadmap and the Fill-Rite product roadmap. I'm curious about where you're investing in kind of advanced technology and innovation. I don't know. I'll leave it up to you. Is that sensors? Is that Internet of Things? Like whatever it is, like where are you investing in the product set? And then maybe also, with the labor costs going up, maybe talk a little bit about, innovation and automation within your manufacturing facilities.
Well, thanks. So the company does have a very long history of innovating. It's how we got into business in the first place. Mr. Rupp's original innovation to help a pump prime itself better in 1933. That innovation today is occurring certainly with the product. And let's talk about a couple of ways that's occurring. First, it's in the iron, in the actual pump itself. Today, pumps are being worked on here from an R&D standpoint to be more efficient, maybe to prime better, or an improved ability to handle solids. And so there are innovations going on in really all 3 of those categories across the product line. We also are doing quite a bit of innovation in controls. You mentioned Internet of Things. Some of those controls can help not only with monitoring, but help with pump efficiency, or maybe help a pump know that it's clogged and unclog itself, those kind of things. A good amount of innovation into customer-facing technology. So today, we're much easier to do business with by electronic means than we ever have been, and we'll continue to advance that. One example, every pump that leaves our facility here in Ohio has a QR code on it that a customer can take a photograph of and reach a dedicated website page that has their test record, the operating manual, repair information. They can even get repair parts through it if they choose to do so. We point them to their distributor because they're probably in stock and shorter lead time from the distributor. But nonetheless, that kind of customer-facing technology is now it's not just a project we work on and then set it on the shelf. It's really an ever-evolving process. Research and development is getting a decent amount of technological advancements into the ways we go about R&D. As an example, we got a pretty wide adoption of 3D printing throughout all of our research and development and pattern making equipment for castings. That's been a good advance for us and has really shortcut our design cycles and helped us be more cost effective. And of course, you asked about labor and automation. Our board has been extremely supportive of investing in our manufacturing processes and our facilities. We have a constant cycle of new equipment that's coming into each of our facilities, and generally when that new equipment arrives, it's more automated than it was. It gains us some efficiencies through capital projects and allows us to increase our capacities without necessarily having to seek additional staff to operate it. So innovation is core to maintaining a competitive moat around the business. We're good at what we do, and we need to be better at it tomorrow because everybody else is trying to eat our lunch too.
And one thing that companies have had to be really innovative about is managing the supply chain over the last, whatever, COVID now, everything that's going on, supply chain bottlenecks and supply shortages. How have you thought about your sourcing relative to maybe what it was in 2018 or 19 before, all of this stuff? Have you had to change your thought of domestic versus whatever, international sourcing of parts, offshoring manufacturing versus, kind of onshoring? Maybe talk a little bit, if anything, about that has changed over the last 2 years.
Yeah, the short answer is no, and we've been very fortunate in that regard. It's because of our philosophies on the subject. So we did not follow the rush to low-cost countries like much of our competition did over the years. And the supply chain that we have is very stable. It's very long-lasting. We have great relationships with those folks. We're in their facilities often. They're in our facilities often. In fact, in a number of cases on the casting side of the business, they actually share their financials with us. And it's not because we're trying to eke an extra nickel out of them. It's because the foundry industry in the United States has been tough to operate in for a while. And we want to make sure that they're going to be around in the future to continue to do business with. So based on the way we've interacted with that supply chain, Ben, they tend to favor Gorman-Rupp. And today there is a rush from many of our competitors to try and get back to at least North America. Every pump company you would talk to is evaluating foundries in Mexico. And that's not something that, we've had to aggressively go do because our supply chain has been able to outperform others and we've taken care of it over the years. It's not to say we're problem free. The COVID and the pandemic has presented challenges for everybody. The good news is, when I talk to our distribution and I ask them, how are we performing? I get, well, maybe you have a challenge or two that you didn't have before COVID, but you're outperforming the rest of the folks that we deal with. And that's important to us. It's part of our reputation and one that we're going to maintain.
And moving on to something hopefully more positive than supply chain issues and, inflation and stuff like that. So the U.S. passed a pretty large infrastructure bill. I'm interested, we hear from a lot of companies that this is a very slow process of kind of, seeing money being actually put to work. But I'm interested in, hypothetically, if we do see a fair amount of infrastructure spending, how the company is positioning itself and, historically has been positioned to benefit from that spending.
You take that one, Scott?
Sure, go ahead.
I think we're already starting to see it, Ben. A lot of these so-called shovel-ready projects we've heard, many of those for cities, especially smaller and medium-sized municipalities, have had a lot of that shovel-ready, ready to go when they get funds. And especially after COVID, they're getting a lot of the money that the federal government just dished out. So we're seeing a lot of that right now in primarily our municipal markets and water and wastewater equipment. Infrastructure touches us all. So the more sales, the more bills they have through Congress, the better we'll do. And we are already starting to see it. And I think it's going to continue for quite a while yet.
And I think, there's always been this. I mean, every year you can read a report about how poor either the road infrastructure is in the U.S. relative to other countries, or the water infrastructure is just like, whatever, so substandard. And we have all these, lead pipes that we have to replace. And there's just like, whatever, so many billions of dollars we need to spend to get up to speed. but but it's always seems to be like, it's a next year problem. It's a next year problem. I mean, have you seen any change in terms of, especially specifically on the water infrastructure side, more focus on really correcting, some of the infrastructure, whatever, what's the right word? I mean,
they wear out.
that we have.
Fresh water will wear out a pipe over how many 50, 60 years. So it's, in fact, there's still some wood pipe over in the eastern part of the country. They dig up occasionally. So a lot of that has been in the ground or in use for many, many years, and it does wear out. And of course, when they come in, they usually do not only just replace that component that's failed, they put a whole new system in. So that's what we're seeing, that a lot of these municipalities that have had challenges in their water and wastewater systems are going in, and now that the federal dollars are available, they're redoing their whole systems. Not only just the pumps, the piping, and many times the technology to make it more up to date than what it's been for many, many years. Scott, any more input on that? But it's definitely helping us.
Yeah, it certainly is. And as those projects are worked on, maybe one thing you didn't touch on, Jeff, is the contractors who work on them are going to need pumps too. If you dig a hole, it's going to fill up with water, and that hole has to be dewatered to allow that work to continue. So there's a lot of ways in which infrastructure investment helps the company. We feel like we're pretty well poised to take advantage of that. Maybe one other great way is stormwater work. Stormwater installations are on the uptick right now too, which is nice. As if it's caused by global warming, I mean, that's not the greatest thing. But as you need to put a levee in to help protect the community, that works pretty well to keep stormwater out, but it keeps rainwater in, and that needs to be pumped back over the levee. And so we've had some recent nice success in that venue too.
And we talked about the importance of the Fill-Rite brand when we were talking about the acquisition. And an interesting thing I noticed when I was reviewing your presentation is that there are a bunch of different brands under the broader Gorman-Rupp umbrella. So I'm interested, in the logic of maintaining separate brands as opposed to having everything under the Gorman-Rupp name. And my sense is that, in specific markets and specific industries and among specific contractors, for example, these things are really well known. And so you'd be crazy to change them. But I'm just, we're always like kind of 18,000 feet and trying to get farther down. So why is it that you maintain so many different brands over time?
Well, the GR Pumps brand does carry a lot of weight with it. It's probably one of the premier lines. Pump lines in the world today, and the applications in the markets that it serves, construction, industrial, wastewater, where we really got our core start. You won't find a stronger brand in those markets, but if you venture much outside those markets and the pumps that are needed for those applications, the GR name is not number one, because simply we don't make those pumps, or we didn't make them before we made the application. We purchased Patterson. We were not in the fire pump business. Patterson put us in the fire pump and flood control business overnight. AMT with the utility pumps. We had those products, but AMT did a much better job in selling them, marketing them, and manufacturing than we did here in Mansfield. National, we did not have a vertical turbine line, so that put us in the vertical turbine business for both municipal and agricultural business. And now Fill-Rite. Even though we had pumps that handled those, Fill-Rite did a much better job and focused in on specific applications that we did not, for pumps mounted on tanks and things like that. So it's a combination of both. If you'll notice, in all of our logos, we're saying the pump people now. So we are trying to tie it together somewhat with the Gorman-Rupp name in a consolidated effort, but we're still not going to get rid of those individual brand names that why we purchased the company. Those are the names and the brands that are known within those industries. The Gorman-Rupp name isn't always there.
And for people who don't follow, the whole pumps industry, I think they'd be shocked at the number of different pumps that are involved in our lives and construction. I mean, it's astounding how many different kinds of pumps are necessary. But I'm interested, it feels like, maybe this is my naivete, but it feels like certain times, like certain companies focus on a specific type of pumps. And then kind of don't venture out and to try to compete in other areas where that is not their core. Is that a fair assessment? And where And if not, where have you seen opportunities to like take the Gorman brand or the Gorman technology into, kinds of applications that you didn't used to be involved in?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. I mean, the Gorman-Rupp name is, as I said, is very well known in the construction market, the irrigation market, the water and wastewater construction. But for the fire pump market, for example, the Gorman-Rupp name I won't say doesn't mean a thing, but it's not the leading brand. Patterson was the leading brand. People knew about Patterson fire pumps. They didn't know about Gorman-Rupp pumps. So the fact that we purchased them and we kept maintained that, because as you said earlier, Ben, it'd be foolish to throw away that brand name. But some companies do that in acquisitions. They become the X company pump instead of X pump company, whatever their corporate logo is, something like that. We think that's a mistake. So we try to kind of merge them both together, if you will. Both our corporate identity, which we're trying to, obviously, you always try to promote that somewhat, but the individual brand name for the market that they serve I think, has to stay there.
And is it basically you have to acquire into those markets, right? It's very hard to say, we're going to go into an adjacent area, adjacent market. Like, we have the technology, but maybe you don't have the brand, maybe you don't have the distribution. And so it really just makes sense to acquire versus kind of greenfield a new pump.
Absolutely. Not only in time, but in monetary, that it would take you to either duplicate that, unless you have a tremendous idea of how to improve what your competition has. And many times, if you want to break into a market, that acquisitions are the best way to do it. It's pretty hard to change the laws of physics. I mean, you've got some bounds around there of how much you can change, and you may be able to squeeze another point of efficiency out of it, or a different material of construction, whatever it may be. But is there enough market to pay for the design of a complete new line of pumps and the time that would take you to do that, and have from a 2-inch pump to a 10-inch pump? I mean, it's a major investment to break into a new market. So, like we have done with Patterson, AMT, National, and now Fill-Rite, we've elected to purchase, and we want to purchase the leader if we can, or a very high market share, and give them the support they need, and the capital, and let them go. And you're in business pretty much immediately instead of many, many years. And if you do develop a new line of pump, there's no guarantee it's going to be better than what's out there. So it's a roll of the dice. That way, it's you know what you got if you usually pay for something, pay a fair price for it, and good people, and let them go and stay in that business.
I'd add, Ben, that you are right that from a pump standpoint, Jeff's dad, Jim, who's been with the company now, I think, paid for 65 years, he says. He's worked here longer than that. But anyway, he says pumps are the number 2 commodity produced around the world. Electric motors would be the number 1, and pumps would be number 2. And I think he's right.
And it's interesting, Jeff, I don't know if you did this intentionally or not, but you basically described the moat around your existing business, which is distribution, brand, longevity, and then some technology. But it's not, obviously, if you can make it a lot, some kind of whiz bang thing a little better, it's helpful, but that's not the main. You wouldn't say that's the technology is not the main driver of differentiation, or am I wrong about that?
Go ahead, Scotty.
The pumps certainly work, and in most cases they work better than our competitors. But if you were to say, what's the competitive moat around our businesses, it's the culture and the people within our operations. They're the differentiators to our customers. They know the customer is the one with the money. They know they're going to take care of those folks in any way they can, because that's the best way to maintain what we have and the best way to grow.
And that's a perfect segue to diving deeper into the culture. So one thing about family-owned businesses is that they can often maintain a culture longer than if they are bought and sold by private equity every 10 years. So maybe talk about those cultural elements you try to embed. You talk about it, the importance of culture, but maybe talk a little bit about what you're trying to embed, and discuss the ways maybe the culture has even evolved over time, over the last 90 years or so.
Ben, I don't know if I heard you correctly. Did you say that you think that family-owned businesses can maintain their culture longer if they're bought and sold?
No, then longer than if they are bought and sold by private equity every 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I say every time we see a company that's bought and sold 10 or 15 times or whatever it is, a portion of that business leaves that was there for why it got to be important in the pump industry or whatever industry. You can only cut the cheese so many times. And I think private equity comes in a lot of times, purchases the company, takes what's good and leaves what's they don't want for somebody else to pick up later. So I think it's been our history and our observation that companies that once they go on the market, and if they're out there multiple times, each time it's a little bit more thicker slice that comes off the pie. So if you see a company go through a lot of ownership changes, I'd be real cautious there. So, but back to your question, I think it all revolves around the customer, customer service and retention. The most expensive customer that you have is one you have to get back. That you made a mistake and you could have done something better, and they've gone to somebody else and are satisfied with them. Those are the most challenging and most expensive customers to get. So our focus is don't lose that customer and not only try to meet his expectations, but exceed them. And that has been our real core focus, no matter what the operation is, whether it's sales or warranty or whatever. Work with your customer, do what it tells, not only what he expects, but exceed it. And it's been very, very successful. There's no magic to it. It's not me going around and putting up signs on the bulletin boards or Scott. We have to do what we say, and that's another big important part of it, is that manage your folks by example. We take a lot of my history, and when I was in sales, I absolutely loved that. And then probably the sales department gets mad at me because I still enjoy dealing with the distributors and the customers and seeing what we can do for them and make sure everything's right. But it all comes back to the customer. I mean, they got all the money. So take care of them and that'll take care of your business for you.
And so early next decade, this company is going to celebrate its 100th anniversary. So I'm wondering what a new employee comes in, what's the process of getting someone to appreciate that legacy but also benefit from all the wisdom and the longevity that this company has enjoyed?
Well, I'll let Scott talk about that, but I'll just first start it off by saying what I just previously said. You got to lead by example. If I'm out there, say, take care of that customer, and I'm not willing to do it myself or show them how to do it, or they see by example that this is how we take care of customers, not only when there's challenges, but when there isn't challenges. That's a very important part of it. But for the new people coming in, Scott, I don't know. I came in 45 years ago. I just picked up the book, and my father made sure that I did, and my grandfather made sure that I did what I was supposed to do. So maybe a little bit better from your perspective of how the new people take Ben's question.
At 17, 18 years now, I'm just about average, it feels like, from a tenure standpoint. Gorman-Rupp is different from the very moment you walk in the door for those who've worked elsewhere. And I spent some time with some other pump companies. First, we hire people with the right attitude and the right outlook. And then we train them. Our methods of operation aren't typical. They're different than most. And we set the expectation right out of the gate within the customers who come first. That's part of the fabric of the organization. The only time I've ever seen an angry Gorman wasn't when we lost money or wasn't when we made a mistake. It's when we didn't treat a customer well. And that says something. And then, once we have those folks with good attitudes and outlook and they're well trained, then treat them well. Let them enjoy the work that they do and the relationships that they establish with their coworkers and suppliers and distribution, their customers. That's what really drives, the culture of the organization, is set that expectation that we're going to take care of customers and then let people enjoy doing it. It's actually pretty rewarding.
And I'll also add in there our profit sharing program, which we started, or my grandfather and co-founder started almost 90 years ago, which was one of the first in the U.S. and Ohio. Has not hurt at all either. Our employees take a real, not only professional work ethics, but I think it's their heart and soul. They feel part of the family, and a big part of their income is based on how the company does. If we make a lot of money, they make a lot of money, and vice versa. So there's that. It's a culture, but it's also economic based too. That we're only as good as our employees. And
that's my favorite day at Gorman-Rupp when profit sharing was announced.
It's sizable, and it gets the message across very well that we got to take care of the customer.
Yeah, and getting to the point of the culture fraying when the company's bought and sold a bunch of times. You'd much rather have employees who feel like owners, even if they're way down in the organization, than always being worried about who when the private equity company is going to flip them in a couple of years. So let's talk a little bit about the Gorman-Rupp as a stock. So I recognize the last 5 years have included an industrial recession in 2019, COVID, ongoing supply chain issues, and now of course people are worried about another recession. And this company's had a really great long-term track record as it relates to the stock. But the last 5 years have been, I guess for lack of a better word, maybe a little lackluster. So I'm just trying to get a sense of, is there anything outside of the obvious external circumstances that has been impacting your performance? And maybe talk a little bit about why the next 5 years are likely to be much, much better.
Go ahead, Scott, if you want. Yeah. It's going to be your baby anyways.
Yeah, Ben, I would say, we certainly agree with frustration over that subject. And I think I would attribute it to, we weren't doing as good a job of growing as we needed to. I think we've solved that. If you read our recent information earnings release, Jeff mentioned earlier that it isn't often all of our markets are up or down at the same time. We're doing a pretty good job right now of expanding the fold. Before the Fill-Rite acquisition and now with Fill-Rite as part of it, I think we've got a very exciting 5 years ahead of us. We really took a solid look 3 or 4 years ago at our strategic plan and bolstered that. It's taking some time to come to fruition, but really now is doing so. And so, we're certainly excited about where things are going. You mentioned the next 5 years and a long time to come after that too.
And as a firm, we like to focus on key variables for companies. Like what are 3 or 4 things that are really going to determine this company's success over our, our 3 to 5 year holding period. So maybe, Scott, what do you think are 3 things this company absolutely has to get right for the stock to be a good investment for both investors and your employees?
Sure. So first, it's to continue to take care of customers. That has to be the primary focus of the organization, and we won't change that. Second, we'll continue to execute our growth philosophy, domestic organic growth, international organic growth, and acquisitions. And of course, we mentioned the dividend policy today. We'll strive to maintain that dividend policy of 49 years of increases in the books, and we'll continue that as we go forward as part of our philosophy. So. Take care of customers, grow, and share the proceeds with shareholders.
And one thing that's really become prevalent these days is the topic of ESG, and obviously people have a lot of different views on what that means and the efficacy of ESG efforts. But I'm interested if just maybe investors plus your employees changing their views on what a work life should be like, or what work life balance should be like. I'm just trying to get a sense if you've had to shift your company policies, if at all, to satisfy the desires of any of your various stakeholders.
So this does get some focus in ways that maybe has surprised us the attention it has received in the investment community over recent years. Gorman-Rupp has always had a good environmental record. It's not very cost effective to be substantial waste generators and do things the wrong way in that regard. We've had favorable reputations in our communities. We're generally known as an employer of choice, or kind of a destination employer. If I go to the grocery store, somebody asks me, and I'm wearing a Gorman-Rupp logo, how can I get my kid into Gorman-Rupp? We do have great reputations in our communities, and the company has rock solid governance. Been a tenet of who we are over the years. Having said that, we're generally pretty modest. We've not taken much opportunity to boast about those aspects of how we behave. And whether we like it or not, looking forward, the investment community is asking us that. They want to hear more from us on those fronts. And Ben, we're beginning to share that story in the coming months and years. You'll see more from us on the subject than you have before, because we realize it's something that's important for us to be able to speak about, and so we'll do so.
And Jeff, as you have taken on the executive chairman role, and think about the family history here, your father and grandfather were involved. I'm interested in what if you had to define your own legacy, what would you like people to remember about Jeff Gorman's 45 years at the company?
Good question, Ben. Well, first, that I didn't screw things up and run the company into the ground would be at the top of the list. But no, seriously, I'd say that I like people to remember me by that. I carried on the tradition of the company of customer service and the culture and the traditions that have made this company what it is today, and kept it pretty much on track. That we had a lot of growth during my sprint. We built our new facility here at Mansfield. We made a number of acquisitions, but basically things ran pretty smoothly. We didn't have any work interruptions. We got a lot of rewards and nice kind of accolades for the things that we've done both locally and overseas for the communities that we're based in. So those all, I think, help tell what Gorman-Rupp is, and then I've been very happy to carry it on. And hopefully the next generation will do the same. But it all boils down to quality products that do what we advertise, exceed our customer expectations, as I said earlier, and keep a family environment in the overall everything that we do. We don't want to be run by Washington or New York or Tokyo or anybody like that. We're our own thing, and we think we can do it better staying on our own and carrying the traditions forward that have made this company what it is today.
I think one consistent topic and focus of this conversation has been the more things change, the more things stay the same at Gorman. But I assume that the world has changed a lot since you first took over as CEO. I'm interested, Jeff, if there's any critical things that you've had to rethink or change your position on over the years, like major things that I thought the world worked this way, but it actually we can still stay the same, but we need to pivot a little bit to kind of maneuver to a new regime or new paradigm.
One that comes to mind right away is COVID. What COVID has done to most companies in the U.S. and primarily larger companies, Ben. I didn't think probably a couple of years ago when this all started that we would be working with a new environment, or everybody working at home, excuse me, and or working remotely. That's been a big one to deal with. I think we've handled it very well, but it was a new challenge.
And Scott, in terms of new things, I mean, I could see in your position, right, a general hesitancy to rock the boat, even in the slightest, even if you had a different perspective, because you've worked together for 18 years, but I've worked for our founder for 11 years, and of course we have our differences of opinion on any number of subjects. So I'm interested in like how you would approach, whatever, something slightly more not revolutionary but evolutionary in terms of business model changes or maybe capital allocation. I'm just interested if how you would approach that with Jeff and the board.
So certainly in capital allocation, we're consistent in that regard. We haven't changed that philosophy at all, other than with the acquisition of Fill-Rite, we'll pay down some debt. but those priorities remain very clear and in the right order. If I'm leaning on anything, more than we have in my tenure, it's on the subject of growth and where that growth is coming from. Incrementally beyond the things we've talked about today. We're developing more new products in and around the spaces we're at. We've been more active in the last 3 or 4 years on the acquisition front. It's how Fill-Rite ultimately came about. I would never say Jeff and I agree 100% of things all the time. We have our discussions and we share our points of view, and in a lot of cases he'll look at me and say, "It's your decision. I'm just telling you what I think." And he's been great about that. And there's been 1 or 2 where he says, "You shouldn't do that, and here's why. I'm going to tell you why." But he's got a lot of experience that I should not ignore. But I'd say our focus on growth is front and center with all of our leadership at this point, and that's doing so, of course, without sacrificing the focus on our customers.
And I think it's a good place to wrap up. So we'll finish with our favorite question and the question we ask all the companies. And maybe Scott will throw it at you because, as Jeff said, this will be your baby. So, what would you say is the most misunderstood or underappreciated aspect of your business or the stock or the company, right? That maybe someone coming to it as for the first time as an investor wouldn't quite appreciate or understand.
So I don't know that there's much that's misunderstood from an underappreciated standpoint. You've heard it today from us. It's really how front and center taking care of the customers are to that approach. The culture that we have around that subject, it really reinforces the competitive mode around the businesses and is core to our success. And you've also commented on today as we've talked, the company's stability and the consistent approach with which we navigate our economic environments has really allowed us to perform throughout economic cycles. And right now we're in a pretty good economic cycle, and that's really highlighting great performance in that regard, and we're excited about it. So I'd say those are the most underappreciated aspects of the business.
Well, Scott, I will wish you luck as you take the reins fully and make sure not to mess up the dividend history. and
I'll make sure he doesn't do that.
And Jeff, you guys have been doing this a really long time, and I've always, from an investor's standpoint, I always am attracted to companies that can maintain employees, for as long as you guys have. So good luck maintaining all that, and I'm really interested to see how all of the growth initiatives play out over the next few years.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate it. It's been very pleasurable.
Great, guys. Thanks again. That's it for our show today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. We recognize that you have a lot of different podcast choices, and we appreciate you spending the time with us. We are continually working to make the show better, and we would love your feedback. The more candid and honest, the better. And if you have any suggestions for public company CEOs you would like to see on the podcast, please let us know. And of course, warm intros are always appreciated. Please feel free to email us at podcast@covestreetcapital.com with your comments or suggestions. Thanks again, and stay tuned for the next episode of Compounders, Anatomy of a Multibagger.